We want to thank you for joining us again for this third installment of the Minnesota Historical Society's programs in honor of the life and life's work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Today's subject is Staying in the Fight, and I am joined by two incredible guests. If you do not know these individuals, I can assure you you are in for a treat. It's been an incredible week, but this is the capstone of a conversation that brings us from the past to the present and what it will take for us to influence the future. My first guest is Sandra Samuels. She is the transformational president and CEO of the Northside Achievement Zone, a collaborative of 1,000 families, 2,000 scholars, and 30 partner organizations working on issues of housing, health, jobs, pre-K through college. I love the way they frame it, cradle to college, education, and wealth. And working together to end multi-generational poverty by creating a culture of achievement in North Minneapolis, where low-income African-American children graduate high school, college, and career ready. So important in our contemporary moment. And then our second guest today is inspiring in her own right. Gay Adams Massey is the Chief Executive Officer of the YWCA St. Paul, which promotes racial justice through education and advocacy. In fact, their mission is to combat racism and empower women, and they provide supportive housing to homeless families and individuals, career pathways and workforce readiness training, youth employment and empowerment programs, and they also operate a health and fitness center. So meeting all needs of the community in important ways. And I am so happy to be joined by both of you today, particularly in the aftermath of yesterday's inauguration, because as we turn the corner in terms of national politics, there's a larger conversation in this moment about what activism will mean going forward and how organizations like North Side Achievement Zone and YWCA St. Paul will play a role in that work. And our frame today is talking about the Congressman John Lewis, the late congressman, and his call for us to get into good trouble, necessary trouble. But I want to begin by talking a little bit about how your organizations, and I want to be frank, how you two leaders in particular carry forward the traditions of the civil rights movement in terms of organizations that are addressing issues of poverty and inequality in the Twin Cities and beyond. Sandra, I want to begin with you. You are transformational and visionary in the way that you're thinking about poverty and in the way that you're thinking about education for young people. Where's that inspiration come from?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Williams. And by the way, your intro was just fabulous, as are you. And it's so great to be here and great to be here with you too, Gay. It is, I was born in the same hospital in 1965, the year that John Lewis crossed the bridge in Newark, New Jersey, the same hospital as Queen Latifah and Whitney Houston, just a couple years later. And riots happened in Newark, and my family, we were kind of stuck in Newark. The fair housing legislation hadn't passed yet, saying that we could move, all these different places. But I tell you, the thing that really launched me was the murder of Butch. I was about 13 or 14, and Butch was the same age. And I remember when Butch got killed, young African American male, I just thought the world should stop. Butch was dead. We don't just we're not just going to go to a wake and a funeral and then we're done. It was like, I thought the adults should stop, and we didn't. And certainly after that, I lost a lot of young men in my life and struggled with, was it true what was said about us? The whole bell curve, because I just saw the community violence happening, and I struggled with that. And went away to college, did Peace Corps in Africa. And but kind of got to a place of really understanding the connection between what was happening in America at the time, right? That predated me in terms of my family who left Jim Crow South, segregated South to the North. As you get older, you start putting together, in fact, your life trajectory based on policies, right? From the ending of slavery, all the way through the desegregation of schools, fair housing. I can track my life by policies. And so anyway, all of that made it very clear to me around the structural and systemic nature of racism, and how it has been an albatross around the necks of our communities, and has forced people. If you take away hope, um, then anything is going to happen, and that's in any place in the country. But America has a unique relationship with the African American community, and what it's done to kind of try to take away our sense of personhood. And so it was kind of just living life and realizing the connection to how my life has evolved, and how the lives of the children and families I live with in North Minneapolis now have been impacted.
One of the things that's so powerful about the way that you frame that, Sandra, is that it is a life of service that we can talk about in your regard, which maps beautifully to John Lewis. Mm-hmm. And also, when you talk about being able to track your life through policies that have been detrimental to communities of color, particularly African Americans. Gay, I have the same question for you, because you mirror that in terms of your own background and your own activism and work in public service. Where do you draw your inspiration from? Where does your hopefulness and optimism come from?
I really from my family, from my people who are inspirations to me. I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. My dad was, I'm a PK, my dad was a pastor and a leader in the civil rights community, in the civil rights movement in our community. And some of my earliest memories were marching with him, participating in sit-ins, all of that. And it really shaped me. I grew up in a family of activists who were fighting to open up opportunity in this country. And so that commitment to community, and that, being taught your whole life, you've been blessed, you need to give something, you have to give something back, it's your obligation, is really what kind of shaped that. And then the models I had of service and of striving and fighting and insisting on change. So, my path's been a little different. I practiced law for quite a while before I moved into nonprofit work, but always stayed close through volunteer and pro bono service to community need. And it's been such a wonderful privilege to be at YWCA St. Paul. I just wish I had done it earlier.
Well, and let's talk about this, because I think we're talking about 2020, 2021 as the year of the Black woman. Let's be clear, on the national stage, when we talk about the transformative impact that African-American women specifically have had on politics in our society, on culture, we owe the Black Lives Matter movement to the influence of African-American women. And certainly it's not just what Stacey Abrams was able to accomplish in Georgia. Nationally, we're talking about the influence of Black women on this election. Sandra and Gay, you both embody a tradition of African-American women, albeit invisible, but central to struggles for civil rights in this country. I think about a Constance Baker Motley and her work in legal. Sandra, you remind me very much in the tradition of Ella Baker and organizing. So I want to ask you, and I'll start with you, Gay. Mission of the YWCA is around combating racism and empowering women. Why are those two issues connected in your mind? And what should we be thinking about as we talk about staying in the fight, on how central those issues are to that fight, particularly for communities of color?
Yeah, they're two really critical issues. And, as a Black woman, sitting at the intersection of those two experiences, race and gender, and the challenges that come with both. And Black women and other women of color have had to really fight on both those fronts. And so that's why the YW's mission was I view it as so important, and it's speaking to the critical challenges we have in this country today. We were built on an infrastructure it truly of white supremacy. You read the Constitution, Black people are 2/3 of a person. That's captured and institutionalized in that document until subsequent amendments. And so the structures that have been built to frame kind of our place in this society are what this fight has been about for generations. And I think fighting racism and all that it's created in the way our systems are structured, the way people opportunity is available, all of that is just the critical fight. And by the same token, women have always been central and powerful in their families, in their communities. That's not a new thing, but making sure that full opportunity is available to women, and all women, including women of color who have kind of that double set of barriers. I couldn't think of a better mission to serve. So, it's just been an important and fulfilling work.
So the same question for you, because that runs so deep into the DNA of Northside Achievement Zone in terms of the scholars and the culture that you develop there, in terms of the families that you work with. In your estimation, why is it so important that those two are linked?
Well, first, that the first Homo sapien ever found, the skeleton, was of a Black woman. So that's really important. And I tell you, yesterday, I just want to connect yesterday with the work that we do here. Seeing the long arm of justice reach out, and we have been fighting from the very beginning to be human beings, both our men and our women, right? But 100 years ago, white women received women supposedly, right, in law, not in practice, received the right to vote. And it was out of the abolitionist movement and married with the suffrage movement. But they quickly said, no, Black women not included. And in fact, one of the leaders of the movement actually talked about, they have a letter to a legislator where she said, if you really want white supremacy to last, give us the vote, because we're going to vote. And of course, there was all kind of suppression, which continues today. Like, we're living a very recent history, right? Still present today. And so the opportunities have been denied us for so long. And we have been, holding it down in community. And on the Northside Achievement Zone, we are about families. And 70% make $30,000 or less, but they're largely African-American single women who are leading the households. We're seeing a lot more couples like really do this kind of work together. But because of that, it's like we understand that for both the girls and the boys in our community to really have the opportunities that they deserve, it starts at home. The first teacher, the families are the first teacher, parents are the first teachers. And so we have all kind of parenting education classes. In fact, let me show you this. This is for one of our youngest scholars. It's college. Yeah, it's from our College Bound Babies program. And I will tell you, the women in that program, if they have 2 kids, if they have 4, they can tell you what year each will graduate from a 4-year college, right? And then we have our partners surrounding them with housing, health, career, support. But they're getting these parenting education classes. They're learning advocacy. We're supporting them, like all of us sitting right here. We've been supported, right? We get that. And then they're advocating for themselves. For me, that is, if you want to talk about real transformation in terms of the community, you empower Black women. And you are absolutely going to do it, because we're going to have our men, their backs, and other women's back, right? We're going to do that. That's our DNA. And you said it so good, Dr. Williams. Like, this is the time. We had Amanda Gorman yesterday, our laureate. Oh my gosh! And then seeing that white women never intended to include us, and then the first woman to be elected to a national office happened to be a Black woman. I mean, that's how justice just works. And so it's an exciting time.
I love that so much, Sandra, the way that you put that. But I'm going to stay with you for just a second. But I don't get an opportunity to talk to two leaders like this often, who are doing work that pivots around the same area of family and home, which is essential, and who do it in a way that denies the kind of Moynihan thesis.
Right.
I love that it's a North Side achievement zone. It's not a deficit model. Very much evident in the work of the YWCA and its programs that deal with women and family. I want to talk about that with you. We'll start with you, Gay. I want to know, as we're thinking about this going forward, as you think forward and we talk about things, for example, Melvin Carter's ambitious proposal to provide seed money for kids to go to college, you have been a big proponent of wraparound services. We see that certainly in North Side Achievement Zone. What do people need to know about what those wraparound services look like and why they're so essential in the fight against poverty?
They are absolutely essential. And, I'm glad you asked about that. We have one of our programs serves homeless families and individuals. We run, we have several apartment buildings where our families stay. Providing people access to stable housing makes it possible for everything else that follows. During the time they stay in our programs, those wraparound services help connect them to resources so that they can get what services that family needs in order. People find themselves in homelessness for different reasons. It might have been domestic violence. It might have been a chemical health issue, a mental health issue, any number of reasons, but probably domestic violence is the biggest. And people need help dealing with those issues. They need support as they map out their plans and goals that they need to determine for themselves that they want to pursue, so that they can get the education, get the jobs that they need to create stability for their families. And those support services make that happen. It's creating connection, community, support, and resources so that people have what they need to heal, to build, and then to thrive and be stable on their own when they move into community housing and are living independently. So the way I think about it, they're getting what we got as kids from our family. Yeah. Your mom and your dad looking out for you, connecting you to services that you needed, so that you could get an intervention when you needed it, get help when you needed it, get set on the right track, have models for how you could achieve and succeed. That's what we're helping these families, supporting them in their self-determination of what path they want to pursue. And we're helping them access the resources they need and get the support they need to get down that path. And it's exciting to see folks who have struggled with barriers most of us can only imagine, make that journey. I mean, it's magic, and it can happen, and it does happen all the time.
So I have to say the chat is already blowing up with people who want to talk to you and Sandra, but I am taking full prerogative as the host to enjoy my time to talk to you first. But I just want to let our audience know, please stay tuned. We are going to get to you. Sandra, I used to work at the Jackie Robinson Foundation. I'm a sports guy. I got to tell you, I feel like when I see North Side Achievement Zone, what it says to me is that the safety net model doesn't work. We need a blanket so nobody falls through the cracks. Right. The zone defense and that model truly embodies that notion of the blanket. Talk us through that and what that looks like and how you are in particular, because I think this is of particular importance and interest to people, this notion of cradle to college and how you're filling that gap and making sure no one falls through the cracks.
Yeah. So the main thing, Dr. Williams, is that, first of all, it's a 2-generation approach. So we're working with both the parents as well as the children, and we call all of our children scholars because we want to get at that belief gap. Like, yes, you are a scholar and you are brilliant and so on and so forth. But anyway, what we often say, I want to come at it this way. Sometimes when I do these presentations, somebody will invariably say, well, first of all, your model's expensive. And secondly, college isn't for all kids. Right. And so shouldn't you be talking about VOTEC more? Like, I get this like all the time. And does it really take all that? Right. So as we talk about this from womb to work and this safety net kind of approach, and it's like, and I always say, okay, so let me ask you all, who here has kids? And this is what I do to people all the time, and everybody raises their hands. Okay, so when you brought your baby home, did you say, oh, I can't wait to send you to an alternative school? I mean, you might drop out. That's okay. Like, you don't. You have the highest aspirations, right? And the aspirations that they have choices. So yeah, some kids might decide not to go to college. We as the adults have been making that decision for them. We've been tracking them. We've been saying to 3rd graders, you're not on track for college, right? So we want choices and opportunities. But then the other thing I say is, okay, so you had your baby. So did they have safe and stable housing? Oh, well, of course. Okay, did you make sure you got them some early childhood supports? Of course. Did you get them into the best school that you could? Yeah. And then if they needed tutoring, did you get them tutoring? Did you get their teeth fixed? When they got older to be teenagers, did you get them mental health supports? Were you stable in terms of your income and able to feed them and provide? Everybody says yes. And it's like, so why then, when we talk about brown and Black children and families, do we think they need anything less? And here's the thing. Yep, it can't happen on a cheap. And my thing is, but what is really, really expensive is to not invest in these families that structural racism has had its foot down on our necks for so long, to not invest. And then, though, we're good with, 18 years later, we'll lock you up. We'll pay for, addiction services. We'll give you a warden when you're in jail. We'll do all of these things. Like I think Gay and I, at some point, the ideal thing would be we wouldn't have a job. We wouldn't need it, right? Because our society was structured. I mean, we're playing catch up here, right? I mean, we're just our voting rights still aren't straight. We still have so many things around structural racism. And again, and I understand our ownership. That's why we're doing the Northside Achievement Zone, right? Families are supporting each other. They have efficacy and power, parents and so on. And we're the wind beneath their backs when the white community has been getting since this country started, right? We're just trying to make it right. Just trying to make it right.
I'm going to push back on you on one thing there, Sandra. You said you'd be out of a job, you and Gay. I think governor, lieutenant governor, president, vice president, I mean, there would still be some jobs here. that vision to carry forward. I want to stay with this. I think it was so beautifully articulated by you, and yet you point to one of the challenges that's faced by Northside Achievement Zone and YWCA around funding. And let's be clear, as you say, this is about investment. What have been the challenges for, and I'll start with you, Gay, on this, and then Sandra, I'd like you to respond to the same question. What have been the challenges in the midst of COVID-19, even as we're having this national conversation about the reckoning with race, in terms of fundraising for the organizations, and what would you want people to know in terms of them making that investment in both of these organizations as really on the front lines, I would argue, of this fight against systemic racism? Gay, you first. What have the challenges been, and what would you like people to know?
Well, the people we serve, who are all low income, primarily from communities of color, and primarily African American, have been hit hardest by COVID, both in terms of health and in terms of economic impact.
Yeah.
You know, this is a very lopsided
Yeah.
recession, because the jobs that have been lost are largely service jobs. The impact has been huge on women and on people of color. And they're usually lower paying jobs. People with white collar jobs who can transition to at-home work have not been affected as much and are in fact saving money. So they're not driving or buying, consuming in the same way. So our folks' need skyrocketed during COVID, not only around essentials like groceries and diapers and basic supplies, but they were also dealing with, you know, lost jobs and kids who had to do remote schooling. And they often didn't have the technology, the stable Wi-Fi, the computers to make all of that work. And so we really tried to step in to help meet as many of those needs as we could and raise money to first address kind of the emergency needs around food and clothing and diapers, supplies, but also around technology. We don't want, you know, like NAS, we do a two-generation approach, whole family. And so we don't want the kids in our programs falling behind further in school. They have to be able, remote school is hard enough without trying to do it on a cell phone or with spotty internet. So trying to address those needs has been a real challenge. You know, many of the foundations in our community really pivoted to try to address this need. I mean, I offer kudos to those who really shifted priorities quickly, issued grants quickly, and to individuals who've contributed. But the need has been off the charts, and there's the problems were big before COVID, and COVID has exacerbated them in a huge way. And so that need just became even bigger, and the funding requirements became bigger to get over that gap.
Thanks, Gay. And Sandra, same question. I think, as Gay said, the problems were big and they've gotten bigger.
Yeah.
What challenges are you seeing or facing specifically with Northside?
Yeah, so that's the biggest thing. As we speak, our babies are not being taught, like, right, they're falling further and further behind, and trust me, we don't have a child problem, we have an adult problem across the entire system, right? And so if we know that, I keep saying that, by the way, it's not just the pandemic, it's also the murder of George Floyd. Yeah. And the trauma that has, so we have, like, I mean, just, and then our federal government, I mean, we've had layers of trauma that have been happening. And so we already had a state that, you know, again, if you're white, you're doing well. And if you're Black, get back, right? I mean, like that, Minnesota is known for that. You know, the median income for African Americans is $36,000. It's $80,000 for white. Home ownership, 75% of white families own their own home in Minneapolis. Only 25% of rent. It's opposite for the Black families. Like 26% own our own homes. Of course, we know that home ownership is the first sign of wealth. Academically, in Minneapolis public schools, 22% of kids were reading at grade level who are Black versus 80% white. Like I know we say we know that there are disparities, but like we need to know that given the times that we're in, the disparities that were there are now, I think we actually should come up with a new word for it, right? And racial disparities are grounded in racism. George Floyd being murdered here was not an accident, right? I mean, it just pulled back the covers on all of the different layers, including brutality, including mass incarceration that have impacted Black folks in the state, across the state for like way too long. So I would say, like Gay, our funders stepped up. They have stepped up. For the pandemic, George Floyd, it has been amazing. And I mean, I got some new brothers and sisters out of this. And I would say what we're really challenged with are policies. And this comes full circle to John Lewis, because even again, without the challenges that we've been in, we can have this great ground game going on in communities. But if the policies and systems that impact what's going on in communities do not change, we'll keep spinning our wheels. And then Gay'll die, I'll die, the next round of nonprofit leaders will be in, and they'll be doing the same thing. And so for me, Dr. Williams, it's funding, but it is seriously policy. And this state has been stubborn around anti-racist policies.
I love that connection to policy. In fact, I want to go back and talk about John Lewis, but before I do, I have to ask both of you this question because it's really important. Both of you have been eloquent and consistent in talking about the need for this for the people you serve, but I think it'd be helpful for people to hear from you. This is hard, emotional work. YW has the fitness center. There's a whole program around self-care and mental health. Sandra, I know that's a cornerstone of the pillars of North. But what are you both individually doing for self-care? You know, I happen to know John Lewis, and he talked about some of the things, you know, having to take some time off and some mental space just to deal with that trauma. Could you just share from a personal standpoint what you're doing to navigate this moment and to deal with that? Because this is heavy emotional work that you both do.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll start with, go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's something that you know, I'm close with my neighbors on my block, and we have, you know, we have a lot of white neighbors, we have Black neighbors, and since all of this has been happening, a couple of my white neighbors, women, have needed to have therapy, get on anti-anxiety medicine. And I'm not being derisive in sharing this, and they wouldn't mind if I did, but I just they feel like this is just too heavy. And I'm like, man, you know, should I be feeling it more? You know, because I mean, I've been like, this is like my whole life, you know, kind of thing. And I realized that there are ways that sometimes I don't eat right? Don't fit exercise in. Have one more glass of wine than I should, you know? So, but this time lately, and those are all things that you could do to just cope, right? But these times especially, I tell you one thing so my faith, for sure, always been there for me. But something that's been really, really helpful for me over the last 2 years and kind of really kicked in is I've been working with Resmaa Menakem, who wrote the book, My Grandmother's Hands, Healing Racialized Trauma. So he does individual work with me, and he's working with my staff, right? And I never realized the connection in terms of our bodies, that our bodies experience whole trauma, our bodies experience racism. And that when I think about Black women, it's like, oh yeah. I mean, and so there are things that I do now in terms of my body, from yoga, you know, to breathing, to connecting my movements with breathing, to meditation, you know, and it has really transformed, and understanding the language of trauma and how I'm experiencing. And it's been a stretch for me to do that, to be still enough to do that. And I'm doing it now in community. You know, so that's the thing that's wonderful. It's not healing is, you know, trauma is not an isolated thing. It happens in community. We have to heal in community. So that's the other part, is the communal nature.
It's beautiful. Okay.
It is. It took me a little while when all these shoes seemed to drop one right after another, especially after George Floyd was murdered and the pandemic was surging. I was working so hard and pushing so hard because there was so much I felt we needed to do to be responsive. I let my boundaries slip, and I wasn't taking care of myself the way I needed to. And then I realized, you're not going to be here to be holding anybody else up and making these things happen if you don't get serious about your self-care. Because I was preaching that to my staff and, having all these sessions for them, and I wasn't doing it myself. I was like a terrible role model. So I got serious, and I found that because I spend a lot of time working from home now, it's easier to get that exercise done every day. I schedule it. It's in my calendar. I was working in a organization with a fitness center, and I still couldn't find my way down there because I had so much going on. But I do it at home, and I need, as I've gotten older, more time just for myself. Quiet, meditative time, whether it's meditation, prayer, or just sitting still and experiencing silence. I need that for myself, and I take more of that time for myself now, and don't make any apologies for it. I've got my boundaries back in place now, and it enables me to keep going and keep a positive attitude and vision and optimism and hope that is so critical for the people that I work with to see. I know they look to see whether I'm feeling discouraged or not. And so it's really important that I kind of nourish I tend to be optimistic by nature, but you got to nurture those things so that you can keep that going. And like Sandra, faith, just knowing that there is a plan here, a bigger plan. And while our lives are about struggle and work, it's to the good, and it's an act of faith to work for your community and your neighbors. So,
can I say amen to that, Dr. Williams? Amen, Gay.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I was going to say amen too. So, inspiration is so important to all of us, especially now. I think we got a little taste of that yesterday, but I want to return to John Lewis for just a minute, because there will be some people who are watching who say, well, we had this great reading by John Lewis. I hope that people recognize in the conversation that we had that these two women and the organizations they represent basically model what John Lewis was talking about in his final letter to the American people in the New York Times. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision drive change. And I would argue that if you look at the platform of Northside Achievement Zone, if you look at what the YWCA St. Paul is doing, it's executing, both organizations, the extraordinary vision of these women, knowing your history and applying it in a way that helps you understand our contemporary challenges, recognizing that struggle is inevitable, but staying in the fight and not losing hope. And it's the essence of the work that both of you do. But I want to ask you, before we take questions from the audience, let's talk about John Lewis and how he personally touched you. How was he an inspiration for you? We'll start with Gay, then we'll go to Sandra, and then I'll get to the audience questions before they come after me, because there are a lot of people that want to talk to you. Gay first.
What a life. I mean, what an amazing man, what a spirit, so driven by love, despite challenges that I think would beat most of us down. I find him a constant source of inspiration because he never got old. Mm-mm. He kept that youthful idealism and fight and energy to the end of his life. Mm-hmm. And he never let the poison of hate or any oppression he encountered change who he was and what he believed and what he valued. When I'm feeling like, feeling like a little oppressed and overwhelmed, all I have to do is look to our history and to people like John Lewis, what they've overcome is so much more than I've ever had to deal with. So it puts things in perspective, and you remember that we're here to fight this fight, and keeping that faith, that optimism, that love for people and community is just so important. He's a total inspiration. Even the dancing.
I love that, the way you put that, keeping that faith and that optimism, that love for community. Same question, Sandra. John Lewis.
Yeah, Dr. Williams, I was telling you, I got it. You wrote an article about him, and then reading his article again in light of everything that's been happening. And, the title of his article, "Together You Can Redeem the Soul of Our Nation, Though I'm Gone." And he sent that into the New York Times on July 15th last year, and he died on July 17th, right? And the whole, encouraging us to, use your life. And I get that. My mother's dead, my dad's dead, my sister's dead. She was just a year and a half older than me. I had a tragedy this summer, and a young person who was with me drowned. And, I get the divine fleeting nature of life in a real tangible way in my own mortality. And the fact that in his last days, that he would sit down to write us a note and say, he said that we were inspiring him. He said, keep it up. He talked about redemption, and he talked about love. At the end of the day, we don't have much time. So even the thing around getting tired, yeah, we might get a little tired, but you just keep it moving, right? we got eternity to rest. And I am so inspired that he used his life for me and for you, Gay. He used his life. He knew the importance of it, that the most important thing is love. And that's what he said over and over again. He didn't hate. He was into nonviolence, into redemption, but he made good trouble. And in fact, I don't even need to say but, and.
Yeah, and.
And I tell you, I wanna go out like that. I want to.
Well, I am going to turn to questions and answers, but I have to say, and I'll exercise my prerogative here too. Some conversations you have, people feed your soul because they're so inspirational, and the work that both of you do is so transformational and so important to our community. So I want to let you know that as we celebrate and lift up John Lewis, and I'm stealing your words from last year, Gay, it's the ripples of hope that individuals are able to share in a community that ultimately bear fruit. And what that community shows is its best face. And you two are creating so many ripples of hope in our community. And I love both of you for your work. And I will now take questions from the audience because the chat has blown up. So we'll take our first question. And it is, what's the most surprising thing you've encountered while fighting for racial equity? Either Gay or Sandra, whoever would like to take that first.
Mm-hmm.
The most surprising thing. That's actually a hard one because I don't feel like I've been that surprised by much.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, it is that every generation, as we look at history, and I'm experiencing it today, that there's a hardness of heart. Right? Where you think, okay, we're all, this just makes sense. We're all human. I can just talk to you about this policymaker and you'll do it, because it just makes sense and it's just there. And that's not how it works, and that's been the surprising thing for me, is that we have a state where Black and brown children are being failed. Mm. And then when you start talking about policies which just makes sense. Can I just do one, for example?
Sure.
I have this thing right here. It's looking at equity in terms of how teachers are distributed across Minneapolis. In North Minneapolis, The average teacher tenure is 6 years. In South Minneapolis, Southwest, it's 23.6 years. 6
Wow.
years, 23 point. The average salary is 62,000 over here. It's 80,000 over there. The average reading is 27.8% are at grade level here, and in Southwest, 88% are at grade level. So that means we're leaving potential of human beings on the table. And there are things that we could do right now with the stroke of a pen. And so that's the thing that surprises me so much is that, and I know it's every generation, but just that hardness of heart. And I keep trying to figure out, like, and I know that's what everybody struggled with. How do we compel people? How do we love? That's why Martin Luther King said, my sick white brothers and sisters. He kept the familial aspect, right? I still love you, but you got issues. And that's the thing that surprised me most right now.
Really powerful, really powerful. We'll take our next question. What policies, this is from Melinda Lee, should we be advocating for most right now? It's actually a good question.
You know, there's a range of things that need focus and attention. I'll just mention a few that I think should be towards the top of the list. We have an affordable housing problem in this community that has to be addressed. You know, in St. Paul, where our YWCA is, it's a city with a majority of renters. And finding affordable rental housing, and I'm putting aside for right now affordable homes people can purchase. It's a huge challenge, and not just for the people we serve, but for anybody working in the community that doesn't have a great big paycheck. And that's a family stability issue. We have to have affordable housing so that families can be stable, so that kids can get educated, so that parents can work, so that they can, you know, if you don't have stable housing, none of the rest of it works. So I would put that up top on the list. I'd put the issues Sandra's been talking around education for our kids. That's got to be a critical issue, and I think jobs for people is one of the issues that's really got to be addressing the impact of the COVID recession, as well as the pre-existing challenges to employment for people who are in lower income jobs and in communities of color is critical. We can't let people have to have the opportunity to work and have stable lives and build wealth. We built had policies forever that have limited access. Let's put some policies in place now that encourage and make access easy for people, so that we can turn this around. Those are just three, and they're areas I'm most familiar with, but there are lots of others, you know, as well.
Powerful. Sandra?
Yeah. So on a national level, to honor John Lewis, we got to be working on voting rights. And so once the Supreme Court said, you know, oh, there's no problem anymore in the states that there used to be problems with, and so no longer do states have to tell us when they're changing their voting policies and procedures. We know now. And John Lewis, that was the number one thing he fought for, right? So that's one. And we can do that on a local level so that it impacts nationally. Big thing though, right now, and we're working on this for education, that our Constitution has not been changed since 1858. It's been on education. It's just talked about education being an adequate, that children deserve an adequate education funded by taxation. It's time to change the Constitution. You and I, when I talked about that hardness of heart, the
Mhm.
only thing in America that changes hardness of hearts is when laws change.
Right.
And when people have the ability to appeal to those laws. So there's an education amendment that is really being championed by the head of the Federal Reserve, Neil Kashkari, as well as Justice Page, as well as many communities of color. And that new language says every child deserves a quality education based on agreed upon standards that the community gets to come up with. And there is a lot of people, don't want it. So the teachers union is against it. And then the folks who don't want court cases to come out of this are also against it. And so it's going to be a challenge. But if we're serious, then we would change the Constitution to say all kids. And when we say all, we're putting Black and brown kids in.
Phenomenal, both incredible answers. Next question, please. What is an example, this is from Mark Wald, what is an example of an anti-racist policy that Minnesota has been stubborn about?
So the one I just said around education is one. So that every single time we've tried to really impact policy around education, it's been blocked. Every single time. And so the education amendment is just one. It was kind of like dead on arrival. So, and we're going to keep at it, but that's one example.
Really, really concrete example too. Anything to add again?
Can I tell you the other one right now?
Please.
The police, the laws around arbitration, right? So my husband was on city council for 11 years. He said so this is years ago. He said every time a Chauvin was there, because they know the cops who cost the city a lot of money in lawsuits, right? Every time, he said 50% of the time when a police chief would fire a Chauvin, 50% of the time the police chief would have to hire that person back because of arbitration rules. 50% of the time. And I don't know about you, I couldn't run my organization if I had to hire people back that I thought were actually dangerous, destructive in terms of our mission. And so, even people really tried to change the arbitration rules after George Floyd, and it didn't fly.
Such a great and concrete example. Anything to add to those guys?
Not on that one. Those are two really good examples.
But it's interesting to me, Sandra and Gay, the conversation around defunding the police has been so polarized because people focus so narrowly on the language and miss the details of which you just shared about how complex that issue is and how it does boil down to stubbornness around policy and practices that are not affirmative of community or humanity. So it's just nice to hear that named in such a way that those of you who are kind of pushing back and can't get past the language, get past the language and understand really what activists in this space are talking about, and that's critical. We'll take our next question. This is from Tammy Lindbergh. What would you tell students about becoming involved in I love this, in their local communities?
I would encourage it wholeheartedly. Our communities need young people's energy, vision, idealism, and students can bring a lot to the table while they learn. Folks can learn from young people's view too. And I think we always have to stay open to that. So much strong leadership comes from our youth. So I would say, look for an issue you care about and figure out a way you can contribute, either through volunteering, through working in a particular area, learning about it, and getting to know your community better. And I'd encourage you to do it in a part of the community you don't know so well. Mm-hmm. Part of the challenge we have these days is we don't talk to each other. In Joe Biden's inaugural address, he was talking about our uncivil society. Yeah. And kind of how polarized we are. people get their news from different places. They get reinforcement of that particular view of the world from a very insular set of friends. We don't talk across groups in the way we need to.
Mhm.
And if you don't get to know people and talk to them and understand their worldview, the opportunity for connection and collaboration is really hard. So I would suggest trying to learn about a community you don't know as much about when you're doing that work.
Right. I would agree, Gay. Great. You said it great.
Thank you. And we'll take our next question. So this is a question from Monica Kruger. Sandra Samuels talked about the critical nature of policies. Beyond paying attention in general, are there ways she would recommend we tune in to policy work, whether organizations, priority issues, lenses to evaluate things through? Another great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it kind of builds on what Gay just talked about. So there's so many housing, jobs, early childhood, K through 12, health, mental health. I mean, so many areas, right? And we can't boil the ocean. So what I've been telling people is, what issue, if you were God or in charge of the universe, would you change, right? And you might be already volunteering in that space. Find out, because if it has anything to do with any people of color, racism is at play somewhere. And so find out where. So if you're into climate and climate change and protecting our environment, like I am, this break, I have become a climate like junkie. And like, we gotta protect our climate. But anyway, if you're into that, understand that that there is something called environmental racism, and find out how that impacts our policies. Because I'll tell you, 2 days before George Floyd was murdered, Salima, who was a mom here on the North Side, one of our biggest champions and advocates, she died of an acute asthma attack, a mother of 4, right? 2 days before George Floyd. And she had lived in North Minneapolis by the highway, which was right near where we had kind of our metal factories. For years, it was proven that we had unsafe levels of toxins coming into the community right over there. And she used to live over there. And so many people over there have asthma. And you can talk in Detroit, I mean, you name it. Where there's a concentration of Black and brown people, low income, that's where all the toxins are going to go. So that's just one example. If you're an environmentalist, you should be working on environmental racism too. You know, if anything, you can find out what it is. If you're already passionate about it, dig in and look for anti-racist policies. And those are policies that would end racial disparities.
Can I just add one thing, Uhuru? You know, one of the things we did after George Floyd's death is we launched a 21-day racial equity and social justice challenge. And it was a program where folks would sign up and get an email every day with curated information, articles, videos, you know, whatever, tackling 3 or 4 issues around race in this country. It was a way for people in a manageable way to dig into some of these issues like Sandra was just raising, like environmental racism, public health, and education, and understanding the history of policies that have informed what our society looks like right now. We didn't get here just because this evolved naturally. We got here because of social engineering and policy development. Yeah. And we're fighting it now, but most people don't have any understanding of that history and context, which you really need in order to understand why we are where we are. And so if any of you are interested, I would encourage you to go to our website. We put all the material up on the site. We can run the challenge for you. Again, if you have a group that would like to take it together and talk about the issues, but learn about these issues, learn about the history that informs where we are right now.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sandra.
I was just saying, she sounds like John Lewis, because that's what he talked about. He would always say, you have to understand history, right? And because truth is the truth, and you can look back and say, okay, what happened then? What do we pull forward now? But truth is truth.
Right.
History is important.
It is the very foundation of the work that we do. It's the work that we're doing at Racial Justice Initiative. But I will say this, when we think about the history of the Black freedom struggle in the United States, and people in Minnesota, unfortunately, because we're woefully not aware of our history, forget the contribution of people like Roy Wilkins and Marvell Cook. This community has always produced stellar advocates in the African American community for civil rights and organizations that have championed Black civil rights and democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Northside Achievement Zone and YWCA St. Paul continue that work in the present. We're fortunate to have them. Sandra, can you please tell people where they can connect with Northside Achievement Zone online?
Yeah. So you can just, Google Northside Achievement Zone, or we're www.the-nas.org.
Great. And Gay, same thing?
www.ywcastpaul.org.
So I'll tell you as we close that people ask me all the time in the aftermath of the tragic murder of George Floyd, what can we do? I'm looking for something to do. Tell me how I can get involved. I think these two incredible leaders today shared concrete ways that you can stay in the fight. We use John Lewis as our foundation, as our anchor, but the reality is there are people and organizations that are doing this work that need your help. And collectively, as John Lewis said, we can redeem the soul of America. This is a moment of reimagination, but we don't have to do that in a vacuum. We can follow the lead of incredible Black women, Black leaders like Sandra Samuels and Gay Adams Massey. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gay.
Thank you, Sandra.